My father sold me like a secret he prayed would never speak. I was 19 the night I learned a woman could be an heirloom, polished, displayed, traded to seal a deal. The ring was heavy before it ever touched my finger. They said his name like a warning, Domenico Valeri. I knew it first as a rumor in our house, a current under the marble floors, the boss with the winter eyes, the man who turned debt into obedience and silence into power. I knew him next as a contract, folded twice, signed once, placed in front of me with a pen, and a father who wouldn't look up. Say yes, Papa had whispered, and live as if all the other words were too expensive. I met Domenico in the chapel my mother loved, and I no longer trusted. Candles threw their soft light against the stone, and my throat flinched with the scent of wax and lilies. He stood at the altar without touching it, a man who didn't bow to anything, not God, not ghosts, not the tremble he must have heard in my breath as I stepped closer. Gia, he said, voice smooth over gravel. I expected tears. I already paid for them, I said, and didn't blink. His mouth made a shape that wasn't quite a smile behind me. The pew creaked with the weight of our families, both sides arranged like chess pieces, my father rigid. My brother Luca pretending his jaw wasn't clenched, his eyes not jumping to the doors every time they shifted. Domenico's men flanked the back wall like shadows with posture-dark suits, darker eyes. One of them, a scar across his knuckles like a confession, stared at me the way a starving dog watches a hand reach for meat. You're young, Domenico said. Young is inconvenient. It requires patience. So don't choose me, I said, and I felt Luca's inhale catch like a match behind me. Shut up, Gia, the air begged. Keep breathing. I didn't choose you, he said, and his gaze slid to my father, lingered, returned to me. He did. I chose the terms. My palm felt bare without a ring to hate. What are they? You will marry me, he said, like a verdict delivered with silk. You will move to my house. You will obey my security and my schedule. You will keep your head down when teeth are bared and keep your mouth shut when knives are out. In return, your family's debt disappears. Your father retains his business. Your brother keeps his kneecaps. My breath, stuttered. So this is protection then, with a collar. And if I say no, his eyes were the kind of blue a winter river uses to remind you it can drown you. Then I say yes to other things. I looked for a window, any window. There were stained glass saints instead, watching me with their beautiful, blind faces. When I asked now, he took a step closer, the scent of cold air and bergamot rising off him in a steady thread. The priest is paid. The pen is ready. Your father has the papers. Do not make me waste the room's patience. My father made a sound half cough, half apology. I felt Luca's gaze on my neck. He had begged to fix this himself, and Papa said, sons who play with fire learn about funerals. I turned to Domenico again. Why me? He studied me like a crime scene. Because you were useful. Because you're lovely. Because your family understands what happens when a debt goes past due. Another quiet not smile. Because you are the kind of woman who will look me in the eye and still ask why. The priest cleared his throat, paper crackling. The candles held still. I'll need a dress, I said. I won't marry in black. You're already in mourning, he said softly. For the girl you were yesterday. My hand twitched. Don't let him see you shake. It held. He offered his arm. I didn't take it. I walked forward alone. The vows weren't vows so much as a statement of terms. My name in his mouth sounded like a promise he intended to keep, and I didn't know if that comforted or terrified me. When he slid the ring on, my finger protested the weight, and his thumb pressed to the inside of my wrist for 1 second. My pulse jumped. I hated it for obeying him after the families poured out of the chapel in 2 streams that didn't meet, and he led me into the sacristy. The door clicked behind us with a sound I felt in my teeth. Silence settled. Then his footsteps measured. "Do you know why men like me don't wear their hearts on their sleeves?" "Gia, do you have one?" I said. He took that like a gift and placed it on a shelf, because bloodstains. His gaze lowered to the ring. "And because women, like you, would notice the color." I held my chin level. "I notice everything." "Good, keep noticing." His hand lifted, paused in the air as if touching me would be a choice he wanted me to see. He didn't. Finally. "Tonight you move in. My driver is outside. Bring nothing. You can't burn." I thought of my mother's locket buried in a jewelry box I didn't deserve, and how smoke walks out of a house like it owns the sky. "My books, you read," he said, and the corner of his mouth shifted. "Bring them. Paper cuts are honest." I should have kept quiet. I should have let the silence stretch until it broke. Instead, if this is protection, why does it feel like a sentence? "Because you are still measuring freedom by the size of a room," he said. "You'll learn better." Before I could answer, the door opened without a knock. A man I didn't recognize, dark hair, darker eyes filled the frame, breathing like he'd run through a street full of secrets. "Boss, we have a problem." Jaw stilled. "Name it." "Antonelli," the man said, and my father's debt swam back up the aisle. "They're not taking the terms, they want blood." "Then they'll get a bandage," Domenico said, already moving. He looked at me, and the room narrowed to the space between us. "You don't leave the car. You don't speak unless I ask you to. You do not touch anything I haven't placed in your hand. Do you understand me?" "No," I said, "but I will." His eyes moved over my face like a hand that didn't need to touch to feel. Then he was gone, the door shutting behind him, the shape of him still pressed into the air. "Run," a part of me said. "Stay," said something meaner. I walked back into the chapel, to the pew where Luca waited with a face that couldn't decide if he was relieved or sick. "Are you okay?" he whispered, words thin and fierce. "No." I slipped the locket from my pocket into his palm, closing his fingers around it. "Keep this for me. If he throws me in the water, remind me there were—" Summers, his throat moved, and he nodded once. "I'll come for you, come for you." "Don't," I said, because I liked him alive. The car was a black animal sleeping at the curb. Inside, leather and heat, and the faintest metallic ghost of gun oil. I sat with my hands in my lap and counted the spaces between streetlights. We didn't go to his house. We went to a warehouse that wore the river like a shawl. The driver opened my door with a face that applauded nothing. "Stay where I can see you," he said, and I wondered if I'd been a person this morning. Inside, voices cut and stitched the air. Men circled a table with maps and phones and a language of nods. Domenico stood at the center and didn't need to raise his voice to own every ear. "They're baiting you," one man said. "Then I will be bait with teeth," he answered. I kept my back to a pillar and my eyes on the door. A woman with red polish on her nails offered me water, then looked like she regretted the softness. I took it. My mouth had become sandpaper. A phone rang. The tone was a little funeral march. The room held its breath. "Domenico," answered Valeri. I couldn't hear the other voice, but I saw what it did to his expression. It didn't change, which told me everything. "Put him on," he said, and his gaze slid to me. I felt pierced and pinned and somehow steadied by it, and I hated that, too. A shard of a voice came through the line, mocking, familiar. I tasted my brother's name before anyone said it. "We have Luca," the voice said, and my lungs forgot the choreography. Such a pretty sister, Valerie. Shame if she learned grief on day one. I moved before I thought, forward, and the driver's hand closed around my elbow like a chain. No, let her, Domenico said, and the man released me. I stepped to the table's edge. Let him go, I said, and my voice didn't shake. Don't let it shake. This is between you and my father. It's between you and him. I nodded at Domenico, not my brother. The chuckle that came through the phone was a small, ugly thing. Your brother for a kiss, the voice said. Public in your pretty warehouse, in front of your men. Show us the bride is loyal. Show us the boss bleeds. Silence blinked. My stomach turned to ice. I looked at Domenico. His eyes were a country with borders and guns. No, he said to the phone, mild as weather. You'll give me the boy because I'm asking nicely. And when I stop asking, you'll learn new words for pain. He hung up, just like that, and the room let itself breathe again. I stepped closer to him. What if they kill him? I whispered. You can't. I know what they can do, he said, without looking at me. I also know what I can do to them. What do you need me to do? He looked at me then, as if measuring. Not my face, but the part of me I hadn't learned to use yet. Stay quiet. Stay close. I can't just stand here. You can, and you will. Or I pushed because fear sometimes makes you bold and stupid. Or I will put you in the car and drive you to the house and lock you in a room until you learn the difference between courage and suicide. I should have backed down. Instead, I reached for the map, the edge of paper whispering under my nail. They won't expect you to use me, I said. So use me. A murmur flicked through the men. Domenico's gaze moved to my hand, then back to my mouth. What are you offering? Your peace, a voice in me said. You're a good girl. I forced breath in. Bait with teeth. The side door banged open, and a young man with fear still wet on his face stumbled in, panting. Boss, speak, Domenico said. A car just dumped someone out down the block and took off, he said. Its eye was already moving before the name finished throwing itself against the walls. The air outside slapped me cold. The alley was a long throat, and at the end of it lay a heap of boy and blood and duct tape. Luca, I said, and the word broke like a bone dot. I fell to my knees. He was breathing. His mouth was bruised, his eyes glass-lit. I fumbled at the tape. Fingers stupid boots pounded behind me, stopping, framing. Domenico crouched, pulled a knife like a strip of night from his jacket, and sliced the tape with one clean stroke. His hand went to Luca's pulse, his mouth flattened. And for 1 second I thought I saw relief. Then he stood, and his face closed again. He reached inside his jacket and drew a gun. It looked bigger than my fear. No, I said, airless. No, he pressed it into my palm. Cold, heavy, alive, double quotes. Choices have teeth, he said, holding my gaze until the world thinned to just the blue in his eyes. You want to be useful, prove it. First order as my wife. If anyone comes through that door who isn't mine, you shoot. You don't ask, you don't scream, you don't run, you choose. The gun trembled, and I told myself it was my hand, not the metal. Dawn single quotes. Don't flinch. Don't fail him. Don't fail him. He is your captor. My head rang with contradictions and a pulse to loud dot behind us. Tires hissed. A shadow broke the far corner. A silhouette filled the door. Breathing, my finger found the trigger, like it had always known the way. Now, Domenico said, voice smoke. Silence fire. The figure stepped into the light and I realized. I knew that face. The sight of him hit me like an open palm. Dark hair, eyes I'd memorized long before my world turned into contracts and cages. My brother's best friend, our neighbor. Since childhood, the boy who once taught me how to ride a bike without holding the handlebars. Enzo. But Enzo wasn't supposed to be here. Not in this warehouse, not in this war, not wearing the kind of expression that said he'd been walking in someone else's shadow for far too long. The gun weighed on my palm like a dare. Domenico's voice was still in my ear. Now I could have pulled the trigger. It would have been easy. One pull, one burst of sound, and I'd never have to find out why Enzo's eyes were locked on mine like a warning. Instead, I breathed once, twice. Jaya, he said softly, and hearing my name in his voice almost broke me. Don't. Domenico stepped forward, placing himself between us like a wall made of bone and intent. You know her. His tone was mild enough to make my skin crawl. Enzo's jaw worked, but he didn't look at him. She's not yours to use like this. Mouth curved, not in humor. Everything in this room is mine to use. My fingers clenched tighter around the grip. Say something, Gia. Do something. But my throat was a locked door. Enzo finally looked at Domenico. If you want to kill me, do it yourself. But she doesn't. The sound that cut him off wasn't a gunshot. It was Domenico's low chuckle, the kind that could pass for amusement if you didn't know what came next. You assume she's unwilling. Ask her. Every pair of eyes in the room turned toward me. The heat was suffocating. I swallowed. He's not the one, I said, voice thin but steady. How certain, Domenico murmured, circling me slowly, a predator making sure the prey knew the rules had just changed. He walks in unannounced, uninvited, in the middle of a negotiation. And you, Mia Mowgli, are willing to risk your brother's life for him. Enzo's eyes narrowed. What's going on with Luca? Domenico ignored him. He was still looking at me. You owe me a choice. You didn't take it. So now I'll take something else. Before I could speak, his hand closed over mine, prying the gun away, not rough controlled, like everything he did, and then he stepped back, aiming not at Enzo at the wall behind him. The shot rang out like a verdict. Dust drifted from the bullet's bite into the brick. Enzo didn't flinch. Missed? I don't miss, Domenico said, lowering the gun. I warn, he gestured at the door. Get out while the warning still stands. Enzo hesitated just long enough for me to wonder if he'd argue. Then he was gone, swallowed. By the shadows outside, Domenico turned back to me. You hesitated, he said quietly. He's not my problem now, Domenico cut in. But you will not hesitate again. I wanted to tell him I wasn't a weapon. I wanted to tell him I was still learning the language of survival, and maybe hesitation was human. Instead, I said nothing, because in that moment, silence was the only thing I owned. He slipped the gun into his jacket, eyes still on me. We go home. Your brother will be there, and Enzo. His expression was unreadable. He has until sunrise to disappear. The ride back was thick with things unsaid. Streetlights painted his profile in gold and shadow, and every time his gaze flicked toward me, my pulse remembered the weight of the gun. When we reached the house of fortress dressed as a home, he opened my door, but didn't step back. You chose not to shoot, he said. You think that makes you soft? It doesn't. It makes you dangerous in ways you don't yet understand. And then, with a look that felt like both a promise and a threat, he added, Don't prove me wrong. The house was too quiet. Mafia homes aren't supposed to be quiet. They breathe with the low hum of voices, the faint metallic click of guns being checked, the echo of boots on marble. But when Domenico opened the door and stepped inside, The silence felt staged, like a curtain waiting to rise. Luca was there, sitting on the edge of a leather chair in the foyer, elbows on his knees, head bowed. No blood, no bruises now, just a stillness that wasn't his. When he saw me, something moved in his face. Relief, quickly smothered. Don't cry. Don't cry here. I walked straight to him and wrapped my arms around his shoulders. I'm fine, he murmured against my ear. Don't make it worse. I pulled back enough to meet his eyes. Worse than being dumped bleeding. In an alley, his gaze darted past me, toward Domenico, who had taken his coat off and was hanging it on a brass hook like he'd just returned from a night at the opera instead of a near war. She's safe now, Domenico said, his voice calm. So are you. Try to keep it that way. Luca straightened. You didn't have to. I did, Domenico interrupted. Your sister's part of my family now. I protect what's mine. The word mine curled in my stomach like smoke. Luca glanced at me, then at the floor. I owe you, he said quietly. No, Domenico replied, slipping his hands into his pockets. You owe her. I only collected what was already mine. The conversation ended there because Domenico ended it. Later, when Luca was asleep in one of the guest rooms and the house had swallowed most of its shadows, I walked the hall alone. The air was heavy with wood polish and the faint, sweet decay of old roses. That's when I saw him. At first, I thought it was just the light bending wrong in the corridor, but the shape sharpened a man leaning against the wall, half in shadow, tall, watching me. Enzo. Double quotes. You shouldn't be here, I whispered. You didn't shoot me, he said softly. So I thought maybe you wanted answers. My pulse hammered. Domenico doesn't know, Enzo cut in. He's busy downstairs with people who'd rather slit my throat than let me speak to you. So let's make this quick. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. Why were you there tonight? Because your marriage isn't what you think. It is, he said, eyes locked on mine. Valeri didn't take you to protect your family. He took you to protect something of his own. You're the only one who doesn't know what it is. My stomach turned cold. You're lying, am I? He asked, tilting his head. Ask yourself why a man like him would risk open conflict with the Antonellis just to keep you under his roof. Ask yourself why he lets you speak the way you do without putting a bullet in the conversation. I hated that part of me was already asking. Enzo leaned in slightly, his voice a blade wrapped in velvet. I can help you, Gia, but you have to decide, are you his wife, or are you still yours? Footsteps echoed from the far end of the hall. Domenico's voice, low and certain, called my name. Enzo's hand brushed mine for the briefest second. Whisper of skin, a spark I didn't want to feel. Choose soon, he murmured, or he'll choose for you. Then he was gone, folding into the shadows like he'd never been there. When Domenico reached me, his eyes searched my face. Who were you talking to? I made my voice steady. No one. His gaze lingered long enough to make my pulse trip. Don't lie to me, Gia. Not in my house. I'm not ready to tell you the truth, I thought. I'm not ready to know it myself. The next morning, the house woke early. Not with music or chatter, but with orders being given in low voices, the smell of coffee thick enough to cut with a knife, and the faint metallic temps of gun oil drifting up from the lower floors. Domenico's men were preparing for something, and whatever it was, it didn't include me. He came into my room without knocking. His shirt sleeves were rolled to his elbows, revealing forearms roped with lean muscle, veins standing out like they'd been carved there. There was no tie, no jacket, just that cold, composed presence that made the air itself take a step back. We're leaving, he said. You're coming with me today. I glanced at the clock. Since when do you bring me on your errands? Since I want to know if you can follow instructions outside the safety of these walls. Or since you think I'm lying to you. I dressed quickly, black, plain, the kind of clothes that don't attract questions. In the mirror, my own eyes looked unfamiliar sharper, like they were learning to read the language of danger. The drive was silent until we reached the edge of the city, where the warehouses hunched like sleeping giants. Domenico finally spoke. Last night, he said, still watching the road, I asked you who you were talking to. I kept my hands folded in my lap. I told you and you lied. He cut in, not angry, not raising his voice, just stating it like the weather. I turned to him. What makes you so sure? He glanced at me then, a fleeting, unreadable look. Because I know the sound of a lie. Yours was quiet enough to almost pass. The warehouse we stopped at was colder inside than out. Concrete floors, the echo of our footsteps carrying too far. 3 men were already there, standing beside a table where a black case lay open. Inside, a gun, not mine, not Enzo's. You're going to hold it, Domenico, said Dot. I shook my head. I'm not you're going to hold it, he repeated, stepping closer, because someday soon you'll need to, and I need to see if you'll hesitate again. The metal was ice in my hand. My palms prickled, my pulse jumping to the memory of Enzo's eyes in the warehouse last night. Aim, Domenico said. At what? He gestured, and one of his men dragged a wooden target into place, a painted silhouette. Faceless but human enough to make my throat tighten. I aimed. The silence stretched. Pulled the trigger. Gia, but my finger froze. Domenico stepped behind me, close enough that the heat of him slid down my spine. His voice was low. This is what hesitation feels like. It gets you killed. The sound of the gun firing wasn't mine, it was his hand over mine, pressing, pulling, forcing the shot. The recoil jolted through me, rattling every bone. The bullet hit dead center. See, he murmured, perfect aim. All you need is the will. I set the gun down, my hands trembling. As we left, I caught a glimpse of something out of place on the far side of the warehouse. Just beyond the open bay door, a figure in the shadows, watching. Enzo. Again. He didn't move toward me, just lifted his hand slightly, 2 fingers against his temple in a silent salute. I didn't react, couldn't. But when we got back in the car, Domenico looked at me and said, almost casually, next time you see him, you'll tell me, won't you? I smiled like I agreed. Inside, something had already cracked wide open. That night, the rain came down like it had been waiting for a reason. It slicked the streets, turned the lights into smears of gold and red, and muffled the city into something softer, more dangerous. Domenico had a meeting upstairs in his study. The kind of meeting that kept the doors closed and the voices low. I used the excuse of getting air. Stepping out into the courtyard, the gate clicked once behind me. You're getting good at disappearing. Enzo's voice came from the shadows to my left. My heart jumped before my eyes found him leaning against the wall under the awning, rain dripping just inches from his boots. And you're getting reckless, I said, my voice lower than I meant. If he sees you here, then you'll have to lie again. He stepped forward, the dim light catching on his jaw, his eyes. Unless you're ready to tell him the truth. I folded my arms. What truth? His gaze didn't waver. That you were never part of the bargain. You were the bargain. I frowned. You're not making sense. Domenico married you to secure a debt your father couldn't pay, he said, each word deliberate. He didn't do it to protect you or your brother. He did it because owning you meant owning what? Your father promised to the end. What promise? Enzo hesitated, as if deciding whether the telling was worse than the knowing. A shipment. Not money, not drugs information. The kind of information that could wipe out half of Valeri's rivals. Your father stole it. And before he could sell it, he disappeared it. Only you know where it is, even if you don't realize it yet. My pulse roared in my ears. That's insane. I don't know anything you do, he said, stepping closer. You've known since you were a kid, but you don't know you know. And Domenico is waiting for you to remember. He thinks marriage will keep you close enough to control, and you, I asked, my voice sharper now. What do you want? What do you want? His mouth curved, not in a smile. I want to find it before he does. Because if he gets it, no one in this city will be able to touch him. Not the Antonellis, not me. The air between us was tight, filled with things neither of us would say. Out loud, the rain hit harder. A curtain between us and the rest of the world. Help me, Gia, he said, and I can get you out before he owns more than just your name. I shook my head. If I help you and you're lying, he took another step forward, close enough that I could see the rain on his lashes. Then you'll regret it, but not as much as you'll regret staying. The sound of the courtyard door opening made me step back so fast my heel hit the wall. Domenico's voice, smooth and steady, drifted out. There you are, Mia Mowgli. Come inside, it's cold. Enzo didn't move, didn't even look away from me. I turned toward Domenico, forcing my face into something unreadable. Just needed air, I said. His eyes flicked past me, scanning the shadows, then back to me. Then breathe inside. Now. I went to him. But as I passed the spot where Enzo had been, there was nothing but wet stone. The next morning, Domenico woke before me. That was unusual. He liked to let the day come to him, never chasing it. But when I opened my eyes, he was already sitting in the armchair across from the bed, jacket on, tie neat, like he'd been watching me for a while. Sleep well? He asked. The question was light. The eyes weren't. Yes, I said slowly. He tilted his head. You talk in your sleep, Gia. My pulse stuttered. What did I say? Mostly nonsense, he went on, but sometimes pieces of things, memories, places. I sat up, pulling the blanket closer. Everyone dreams. Some dreams aren't dreams, he said, rising to his feet. Some are truths trying to crawl out. He crossed the room and stopped at the side of the bed. Tell me, when you were young, did your father ever take you to a place with red doors? The question landed like ice water down my spine. I had no reason to remember that, yet I did. A hallway lined with red painted doors, the smell of leather and smoke. My hand in my father's. No, I said. His gaze stayed on me for another long moment, like he could see the lie forming in my throat. Finally, he straightened. We're going for a drive. You might remember better with the right view. The view turned out to be the docks empty at this hour, gulls wheeling in the fog. Domenico's men kept their distance, but I could feel their eyes on me. He led me to the end of a long pier, hands in his pockets, his voice low. Your father left things unfinished, things people would kill to possess. If you know where they are, even if you think it's meaningless. I don't. I cut in. You'll tell me, he finished, like I hadn't spoken. I wanted to ask him what would happen if I didn't, but I already knew. That night, back at the house, I found an envelope slipped under my bedroom door. No name, no handwriting I recognized. Inside was a single photograph, me, maybe 6 years old, standing in front of one of those red doors, and behind me, not my father, but Enzo. Scrawled across the back in rough black ink. You've been remembering the wrong man. My chest tightened. Breath-catching, Domenico single quotes S voice came from the hall. Gia, are you awake? I shoved the photo under the pillow, my voice steady. Yes. The door opened a moment later, and he stepped in, eyes searching. Good, he said softly, because tomorrow you're coming with me to meet someone, and I want you to be honest. I nodded. Inside, I was already lying. The car ride was silent, but it wasn't the same silence as before. This one had teeth. Domenico. Single quotes as hand rested casually on the steering wheel, but I could feel his focus on me, even when his eyes stayed on the road. We pulled up outside a restaurant I didn't recognize, narrow, unmarked, the kind of place you only find if someone wants you to. Inside, it was dim, just a handful of tables, most of them empty. The air smelled faintly of wine and something sweet baking in the back. He led me to a corner booth. I slid in, and he sat across from me. A man appeared almost instantly, not a waiter. Too stiff, too sharp around the edges. He slid into the seat beside Domenico without asking. Gia, Domenico said, "This is Alessio. He works with people who handle information." I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. Alessio studied me like I was a puzzle he'd been told had missing pieces. Your father ever bring you to the Porto Rosso Club? I shook my head. Sure about that, yes. He leaned forward. Because we have someone who says otherwise. My fingers tightened under the table. Domenico single quotes, eyes didn't move from mine. Answer carefully, Mia Mowgli, before I could. The door to the restaurant opened, and a new shadow fell across our table. Enzo. He didn't look at me at first, just walked straight toward us, casual like he belonged there. He stopped beside our booth, his hands loose at his sides. You didn't invite me to lunch, Domenico, he said, but I heard you were discussing family history, and since I'm part of hers, I thought I'd join. Alessio shifted, tension sparking. This isn't your table. Enzo's eyes flicked to him. It is now. He slid into the seat beside me, close enough that our shoulders brushed. Domenico's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed calm. Bold move, walking into a conversation that doesn't concern you. It concerns me, Enzo said. Because you're asking her questions you already know the answers to. Domenico leaned back slightly. Enlighten me. Enzo's gaze didn't leave the Porto Rosso Club. The red doors, her father, she was there. But not for you. Not for what you think. My breath caught. Domenico's single quotes eyes slid to mine. Is that true? I opened my mouth, closed it. Enzo's hand brushed mine under the table. A quick, deliberate touch, warning or promise. I couldn't tell. Don't put her on trial here, Enzo went on. Unless you're ready for her to put you on one. Domenico's voice was quiet, but it hit like steel. You've got 5 seconds to stand up and walk out before I decide what happens to you. Enzo smiled, slow and dangerous. Then you'd better decide fast. The space between them was a loaded gun, and I was sitting right in the middle. For a moment, no one moved. The restaurant felt smaller, the air heavy with the kind of silence that makes you choose a side before the first word is spoken. Domenico single quotes S. Eyes never left Enzo, but I could feel his focus shifting, like he was watching me through him. Finally, Domenico gestured to the seat. Fine, you want to sit. Sit, but speak carefully. Every word you say here, you'll have to live with. Enzo leaned back in the booth, his arm brushing mine again. Deliberate this time, that's fine. I've been living with this for years. Alessio's jaw tightened. This isn't the place. It's exactly the place, Enzo cut in. Because she needs to hear it where you can't twist it into something else. I turned to him, my voice low. Then say it. Enzo's eyes softened, just for a second. Your father didn't owe the Valeris anything. He was working with me. We were going to sell what he had, those documents, to the highest bidder. Domenico got to him first. Domenico's voice came sharp, cutting through the table. What he had was mine by right. Your father was a thief. Your father was a survivor, Enzo shot back. He knew you'd come for him, so he left the trail in pieces. And you, he turned to me, you were one of them. You saw where he hid the rest. You just don't remember it yet. My stomach nodded. Why wouldn't he just tell me? And voice lowered, because if you knew, you'd be dead already. The table went still. Even Alessio's breathing slowed. Domenico single quotes eyes were locked on mine now. You believe him? I didn't know. Enzo reached into his jacket and slid something across the table toward me, a small brass key, worn smooth. That's to a locker in the old port station, he said. What's inside will prove I'm telling the truth. Domenico's hand moved halfway to the key before I did. I picked it up. His gaze on me changed, colder, sharper. Gia, just my name, but layered with warning. Enzo stood, brushing a speck of lint from his sleeve. Your choice, he said, but make it before he decides for you. He walked out without looking back. Domenico stayed seated for a long moment, then leaned in, his voice barely more than a whisper. If you use that key without me, it won't be Enzo you have to be afraid of. I slipped the key into my pocket. Inside, my decision was already forming. I didn't tell Domenico I was leaving. I told the housekeeper I was going for a walk, and that was almost true. The old port station was mostly abandoned now, its high glass windows smeared with dust, the echo of gulls louder than any train that used to run here. Locker 312 was at the far end of the row, the numbers faded but still legible. My hand tightened around the brass key until it bit into my palm. If there's nothing inside, I walk away. The lock turned with a small, reluctant click. Inside was a thin black envelope. No name, no markings. I slid it out and opened it. Photographs spilled into my hand. Me younger, at different ages. Always in the background, barely aware of the camera. And in every one my father, sometimes smiling, sometimes tense, and always, somewhere in the frame, a man I hadn't noticed before, Domenico. The dates on the back were years before I ever thought we'd met. Beneath the photos was a single folded page. It was a bank statement, not money, but a transfer of assets from an account under my father's name to something labeled simply Valeri Holdings. Valeri Holdings. The date was 3 days before my father disappeared. My breath caught. Enzo said my father worked with him. Domenico said my father stole from him. But this said my father gave something to Domenico willingly. And if that was true, then one of them wasn't lying, at least not about everything. I slid the photos and paper back into the envelope and tucked it inside my coat. A shadow fell over me before I could close the locker. You shouldn't be here alone, Domenico's voice said. I turned slowly. He was leaning against the wall, his coat unbuttoned, hands in his pockets, as if he'd been there a while. Following me now? I asked. His mouth curved slightly. Always. He nodded at the envelope. Find anything worth remembering. Just old pictures, I said. His gaze held mine long enough to tell me he didn't believe me, but he didn't push. Instead, he stepped forward, closed the locker himself, and pocketed the key. Come home, he said, not a request. As we walked out, I knew 2 things. 1, he now knew I'd seen whatever was in that locker. 2, he was letting me keep it for now, and that meant he wanted to see what I'd do with it. That night, the envelope felt heavier than it should have. I kept it under my pillow like a secret that could burn me in my sleep. Enzo's voice was in my head. Your father didn't owe him anything. Domenico's was there too. Some dreams aren't dreams. Some are truths trying to crawl out. If I gave the envelope to Enzo, I'd be betraying my husband. If I gave it to Domenico, I might be erasing the last thing my father left behind. By midnight, I couldn't stand it anymore. I slipped from bed, pulled on my coat, and stepped out into the courtyard. Enzo was already there, leaning against the far wall like he'd been waiting. You have it, he said. Not a question. I'm not giving it to you, I told him, my voice low. Not unless you tell me what's really in it for you. He pushed off the wall, closing the space between us. Freedom, for me, for you, the kind Domenico will never give. And when you have it, his jaw tightened. Then I disappear, and you never have to see me again. I didn't know if that sounded like a promise or a threat. A door creaked behind us. Domenico stepped out, hands in his pockets, gaze moving from Enzo to me. Give it to me, Jaya, he said softly, and I'll forget this little midnight meeting ever happened. My fingers closed around the envelope inside my coat. Enzo's voice came again, urgent. If you give it to him, you'll never know the truth. Domenico's eyes narrowed. And if you give it to him, you'll never be safe again. The rain started, then soft at first, then heavier. I looked at one man. Then the other. And I stepped forward. The envelope left my hand. The envelope landed in Enzo's hand. For a second, he just looked at it like it was too easy, like he didn't trust what had just happened. Then his eyes lifted to mine, and something flickered there. Surprise, maybe even respect. Domenico's face didn't move, but I felt the change in him, like the air right before a storm. Enzo slipped the envelope inside his jacket without opening it. You just changed everything, he murmured. Domenico stepped forward, close enough that I could feel the weight of his presence. Did you think, he said quietly, that there wouldn't be a price? I swallowed. Maybe I'm ready to pay it. His gaze held mine for a long, slow beat. Then he turned to Enzo. Walk away while you still can. Enzo didn't. Not until she's out of your house. She's my wife, Domenico said. She's not yours to take. Then maybe she's hers to choose, Enzo replied. The tension between them was a live wire. The rain made it worse, soaking through our clothes, blurring the edges of the night. Finally, Domenico stepped back. Not surrender, just delay. You'll regret this, Gia, he said, his voice low and final, and when you do, you'll come back to me. He walked inside without looking back. Enzo's hand found my arm. Come with me now, before he changes his mind. I hesitated, glancing at the door that had just closed behind Domenico. Then I turned toward the gates. Enzo's car was waiting just beyond the gates, engine low, headlights off. We didn't speak until the house was a shadow in the rearview mirror. Only then did he reach into his jacket, pull out the envelope, and set it on the dash. You're sure you want to see this? He asked. I've risked enough not to, I said. He tore it open. The photos slid out first, the same ones I'd seen in the locker. He spread them across his knee like a hand of cards. Look closer, he said, and I did. In one of them, my father's hand was resting on the shoulder of a boy barely a teenager. The face was shadowed, but the jaw, the eyes, it was Enzo. My stomach tightened. You knew him. Enzo nodded long before Domenico did. He was going to bring me into whatever he was building. Then he vanished. When I found out Domenico had him, it was too late. I picked up the bank statement. And this, it says he gave everything to Valeri Holdings. He didn't, Enzo said. He signed it over to me. Domenico forged the name. I stared at him. You expect me to believe that? His eyes didn't waver. Believe it or don't, but the proof isn't in the paper. It's in what he left me. And now you. From his pocket, he pulled a small silver chain with a key at the end, different from the brass one, older. This opens a safe. What's inside will either save us or kill us faster. Outside, the city lights blurred past, and for the first time I realized we weren't heading anywhere familiar. Where are we going? I asked. Enzo's mouth curved, just enough to look like trouble. To finish what your father started. The road stretched ahead, black and endless, and somewhere, behind us, in that house, I knew Domenico wasn't waiting. He was hunting.